In the medieval world, sleep was not a private thing. It was vulnerable. You didn't just close your eyes. You entered a place where spirits could reach you, where God could judge you, and where evil had more freedom than in the waking world. People didn't use the word nightmare the way we do now. It wasn't a dream that scared you. It was a presence, something that pressed on your chest, made you unable to move or breathe. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it laughed. Sometimes it just watched. They believed the mare was a spirit, not quite a demon, but not quite human. It came to those who were weak, or sinful, or alone, and it rode them through the night. Not like a horse, like a curse. In the medieval world, sleep was not a private thing. It was vulnerable. You didn't just close your eyes. You entered a place where spirits could reach you, where God could judge you, and where evil had more freedom than in the waking world. People didn't use the word nightmare the way we do now. It wasn't a dream that scared you. It was a presence, something that pressed on your chest, made you unable to move or breathe. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it laughed. Sometimes it just watched. They believed the mare was a spirit, not quite a demon, but not quite human. It came to those who were weak, or sinful, or alone, and it rode them through the night. Not like a horse, like a curse. In some parts of Europe, people would place a broom sideways by their bed, because they believed the mare would be forced to count every straw before it could climb onto your body. Others tied knots in their hair before sleeping, so that the spirit would get tangled and spend the night stuck in confusion. If you woke up breathless or aching or anxious, they didn't ask what you dreamed. They asked, what visited you? And so nightmares were not just part of sleep. They were part of sin, part of the weather, part of the moon, part of being human, in a world too quiet and too dark to ignore what you were afraid of. In Germany, they whispered that if the mare visited you once, she would return every night for 7 years, unless you cursed her or slept with a knife under your bed. In Italy, mothers hung red strings over the crib of a newborn child, because the mare, they said, hated the color red. In parts of the Slavic world, people believed the mare was a soul of someone still alive, a neighbor, a jealous cousin, a woman who slept too well. She wouldn't know it, but her spirit would wander at night and press itself on strangers. When they woke up breathless, they knew whose spirit had come, and they'd never look her in the eye again. These weren't metaphors. These weren't poems. They were facts, passed down on people who saw sleep not as rest, but as exposure. If you were weak, you'd be visited. If you were impure, you'd be punished. If you were lucky, you'd wake up. So when they said, "I had a nightmare," they weren't looking for comfort. They were looking for a reason, a cause, a sin, a sign, or someone to blame. Some believed that nightmares came through the keyhole, that while your eyes were shut, something small enough to slip between cracks could drift into the room and sit silently on your chest. So they stuffed cloth into the doorframe, lit candles on the floor, drew chalk circles on the stone, and others blamed the air itself. They said that if you breathed too deeply in your sleep, the night could fill your lungs with something dark, not poison, not smoke, just fear, the kind that didn't go away when you opened your eyes. And if someone died in their sleep, they didn't say the body had failed. They said the soul had lost the fight, that something came in the dark and stayed too long. Even animals, they said, could sense when a nightmare was not just a dream. Cats would hiss at empty corners. Horses would not enter the room, and if a child cried in their sleep, no one woke them, because touching someone in the middle of a true nightmare could trap the spirit in between. Nightmares, in their world, were not a mistake of the brain. They were a message, or worse, a warning. Some people refused to sleep alone, not out of fear of robbers, but because they believed that darkness could count heads. And when it saw only one, it took the chance. In monasteries, monks slept in shared halls, not just for order, but for safety. If one cried out in his sleep, the others would not wake him. They would whisper a prayer and let him face the night alone. And in towns, midwives were sometimes asked not to help with births, but with dreams. They carried herbs, candles, oils. They knew what to burn, what to place under the tongue, and what names not to say out loud. Because in that world, sleep was not the escape we think it is. It was a doorway, a question, a moment where the living and the unseen came closer than they were meant to. And if you woke up sweating, trembling, unable to move, it wasn't because you were dreaming. It was because something was watching. And still, they slept. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they had no choice. In a world of cold stone floors and open roofs, you didn't sleep for rest. You slept to survive. And when the dark things came, no one asked if they were real. They only asked, which one was it this time? In the medieval world, not every nightmare was faceless. Some had names. People believed that demons didn't just visit dreams, they lived there. They called them incubus and succubus, spirits that fed on the soul through pleasure. These were not monstrous creatures with claws, but beautiful figures, too beautiful. They came when the body was warm with sleep and the mind was soft. A whisper, a touch, a kiss, not imagined, but real. When you woke up breathless, ashamed, trembling, it wasn't you, it was them. You hadn't sinned, you'd been chosen. The church, uncomfortable with the truth that even monks and priests had these dreams, gave the demons names. Belphegor, Asmodeus, Lilith. Each one specialized in a different kind of temptation. Some came as old lovers, some as fears you never dared speak aloud. They visited when the soul was unguarded, when the moon was high, when you forgot what you swore you'd never want again. They said that if you dreamed of someone you desired, and they answered you in the dream, that person was now cursed. The demon had taken their face, and tomorrow night it would wear it again for someone else. People tried to protect themselves. They avoided sleeping on their backs or under the full moon. Some believed the soul could slip out through the mouth, and that's where demons entered. Monks tied cords around their wrists to remind themselves, even in dreams, that the body was not in charge. Others burned herbs in the corners, whispered psalms, laid iron under the bed, because demons didn't knock. They entered through desire, and desire doesn't need a door. The succubus was said to wait until you were asleep, Then press her face to yours, not to kiss, but to breathe in your soul. If she liked what she tasted, she would come back, night after night, until your spirit thinned and faded. You'd die with no blood, no wound, just stillness, as if sleep had gone too deep. A soft death. And when that happened, they didn't blame the demon. They blamed your weakness. You could confess. You could beg. But once it found you, it remembered. In fear, people began to silence their dreams. They refused to speak them aloud, as if words could give them power. The worst dream wasn't the one that terrified you. It was the one that made you feel good, the one that lingered. If you dream of fire, one priest wrote, don't touch your mouth when you wake. The demon may still be inside. Some monks stopped sleeping. They feared what would come if they let go, because dreams are doors, and not every door opens outward. And so they prayed to stay awake. And when that failed, they prayed to forget. There were stories of men who locked themselves in stone cells, believing that walls could block spirits. But no wall stops the mind. A demon could wear any face, the one you miss, the one you love, the one you're not supposed to want. And when it smiled at you, you smiled back. That was the true fear. Not that something evil would come, but that when it did, you would welcome it. So they turned to silence, to ritual, to forgetting the dreams they couldn't control. But in sleep, nothing stays buried. Not forever. Some lit candles, hung charms, placed bowls of water under their beds, believing water could trap shadows, not to stop the dream, but to survive it. And still, they dreamed. Because even fear becomes familiar. Even demons can feel like company. And tomorrow, they would do it all again, because the night always returns. And the dark always remembers your name. They feared demons in the dark, but what they feared more was when the demon looked like someone they knew, when the voice in the dream called them by name, when they woke with a mark on the skin, when a child cried in sleep and didn't remember being a child at all. There were nights when it wasn't clear if the person who woke up was the same one who fell asleep. And that was a line, the one they couldn't see, the one between dream and possession. Some dreams were too vivid, too specific. A man dreamed of drowning and woke coughing up water. A woman dreamed of giving birth and bled for 3 nights. These weren't visions, they were visitations. Villagers whispered of people who dreamed the same dream, night after night, until their minds cracked like old wood. They stopped eating, spoke in languages no one taught them, started writing in symbols they'd never seen. Some said they were cursed, others said they were chosen. But everyone agreed on one thing. The more you returned to the home dream, the less of you came back. They had a name for it, not a medical one, not a holy one. They called it being taken. It started small, talking in your sleep, waking up in the wrong bed, forgetting names that used to be yours. Then came the voice, not always in the dream, sometimes during prayer, or while standing near a mirror too long. Families would tie ropes to a sleeper's wrists, not to restrain them, but so they could feel if something else pulled. Some families brought priests, others brought chains. Because what do you do with someone who wakes up screaming in a voice that doesn't sound like theirs? A man in Bruges was said to have recited the Book of Revelations backwards in his sleep for 3 nights. On the 4th night, he bit through his tongue and never spoke again. In a small French village, a girl woke up every morning with symbols carved into her skin. They thought it was self-harm until they locked her hands in wooden boxes, and the marks still appeared. Not all believed it was demons. Some thought it was a trapped soul looking for a body. Others believed it was punishment, that people who crossed certain spiritual lines brought something back with them. They called those dreams thin dreams, dreams where the veil was weak, dreams that didn't feel like dreams at all. Monasteries were quiet about such things, but even monks had rules. Never speak to a voice in a dream. Never follow footsteps you didn't hear. Never promise anything, even in silence. One monk, they say, wrote an entire gospel after dreaming of a hooded figure for 7 nights. On the 8th night, the ink in his inkwell turned red. The manuscript was burned. In the East, some believed this wasn't evil, but awakening. That sleep allowed the soul to travel, and sometimes it found something that changed it. The trouble was, it didn't always fit back inside the body. That's why some were never the same. They laughed differently, forgot how to cry, avoided mirrors. So they began rituals. Salt lines at the door, cold water at the bedside. Not to prevent possession, but to remind the soul of its place. Because the line between dream and possession was never about belief. It was about boundaries. And boundaries are only strong if you know where to draw them. Most people didn't. So they slept in fear, not of nightmares, but of losing who they were somewhere inside the dream. Some people stopped dreaming altogether. They said it was safer. But the body doesn't like silence. One man went blind, but only when he closed his eyes. A woman lost the ability to speak, but whispered in perfect Latin while asleep. In the North, there was a belief that too much sleep could unfasten the soul. It would drift too far, and something else would slip in through the cracks. Some wore bells around their necks, not to keep others away, but to be heard in case they woke up as someone else. The church offered no clear answers, only confessions. And those who confessed were rarely the same afterwards. By morning, most would forget the dream, but the house would be colder, the shadows longer, and the mirror slightly cracked. They learned to live with it, or not. Some said the dreams were metaphors. Others said they were maps. But if they were maps, then some people never made it back. There are stories, old ones, about dreamers who woke up in the wrong year. A man who swore the moon had vanished. A woman who insisted the king was dead 3 days before he actually died. The line between dream and possession wasn't just spiritual. It was time. It was memory. It was something deep in the bones, a thread that, once pulled, might unravel everything. That's why the fire was always kept burning at night, not to warm the room, but to remind the sleeper of what was real. In the medieval world, sleep was never just sleep. It was a doorway, a risk, a ritual. People didn't just lay down and hope for rest. They prepared. They protected. In villages, old women sold bundles of dried herbs wrapped in cloth. You didn't drink them. You slept with them. Lavender for protection. Rosemary for clarity. Thyme to guard the soul. They believed that scent could keep spirits away, that a strong smell meant a strong barrier. Under pillows, they placed iron nails, holy metals, even teeth, objects that held memory or defiance. Because in the dark, meaning was armor. And there were words, not grand curses, but small verses passed down for generations. Sleep, but do not wander. Dream, but do not leave. Let no thing climb into your bed. Let no voice answer when you breathe. These weren't just rhymes. They were boundaries. In many homes, bedtime was a ceremony. The fire had to be put out the right way. Doors locked not just with bolts, but with whispers. Children were seen as fragile. Their souls still loose, not yet anchored to the body. So they were wrapped in red. Bells hung above the cradle, threads tied to tiny wrists. In some towns, mothers whispered names backwards before laying the child down. Because demons, they said, couldn't follow reversed names, and if a child cried in sleep, you didn't shake them awake. You sang. Not lullabies, but protection songs. Soft, repetitive, more spell than melody. Even silence held weight. The wrong kind could attract attention, so the room had to carry the right words. Words that circled, words that guarded. In monasteries, the evening bell was not just a signal to stop working. It was a call to guard the soul. Monks would kneel by their beds, not to ask for dreams, but to ask to be spared from them. Let me rest, but not wander. Let me close my eyes, but not open the gate. The act of lying down was sacred. They faced the wall, crossed their arms, covered mirrors, because sleep to them was a rehearsal, a small death. And like death, it needed ritual. In cities, people slept with knives beneath their beds. In forests, they carved symbols into wooden walls. Every place had its version of fear, yet all trusted the same things. Salt, smoke, psalms. Not because they were powerful, but because they were known. And when the dark feels unknown, familiarity becomes armor. They didn't try to master sleep. They learned to respect it. Not every shadow could be chased, but you could prepare your breath, your space, your spirit. That's why they left one candle burning, not for light, but so the soul could find its way back. They said, if you wake and feel cold, even under blankets, something came too close. So they stopped asking what dreams meant, and started asking what they left behind. In the end, they didn't sleep with trust. They slept with hope. Hope that the herbs would work, that the words would hold, that something sacred would watch while they slept. And so they slept, wrapped in scent, surrounded by symbols, guarded by words. Not because they trusted the dark, but because they trusted their preparation. Sleep, for them, was not escape. It was ceremony, a quiet kind of bravery. And every night, when they closed their eyes, they weren't just resting, they were entering sacred ground. Children were taught to cross their arms before sleep, not for comfort, but to bind the soul to the chest. In cold regions, they slept on their side, facing the wall, so nothing could sit on their chest. Some believed demons entered through the mouth, so they stitched the corners of their pillowcases shut, or slept with coins in their mouth, silver, if they could afford it. Monks slept with open palms, so if they died in the night, their hands would be ready to receive judgment. In remote villages, they made the sign of the cross on the soles of their feet, so the soul wouldn't wander far. Others believed in certain poses made you invisible in dreams. Left knee bent, right arm under the pillow, heart turned away from the moon. No one could explain why. But if you slept wrong, bad things came looking. In some towns, people whispered their prayers into jugs of water, then placed the jug under the bed. By morning, the water would be still, or swirling. If it moved, they threw it into the fire. Priests taught the 5-point posture: knees bent, arms wide, spine straight. Not because it was comfortable, but because it formed a cross. They said this made the body harder to enter. In the East, some believed the spirit hovered just above the chest at night, and that lying flat trapped it. So they slept half-sitting, with a book tied to the forehead, to anchor thought and memory. Some rituals required pain: a splinter under the thumbnail, a needle in the heel, just enough to remind the body it was still alive, because the dead sleep too, and dreams don't always know the difference. In the darker corners of Europe, people began inventing their own postures. A widow who slept curled in the shape of a question mark, so the spirits would think she had no answers. A child who laid one leg over the edge of the bed, so any ghost would take that instead of her soul. These weren't traditions, they were last hopes. In Florence, a man designed a wooden bed with one side missing, believing the soul must have an escape route. He died sitting upright, eyes open, hands in prayer. They say his body never fell over. There were whisperers, midwives, and mothers who taught that posture didn't just protect, it signaled. That the way you slept told the spirits whether you wanted to stay. So the most dangerous pose of all was peace, stillness, arms open, heart facing the heavens, because it meant, I'm ready. And sometimes something answered. Some families built beds in corners, so nothing could circle them in the night. Others stacked salt under each bedpost and changed it every 3 nights, just in case it absorbed something. One tale speaks of a bride who slept with her veil on, to confuse spirits who looked for faces. Another of a boy who only slept in boots because he dreamed of running. In one town, people were buried in the position they slept in, as if that pose could carry them into the next life without disturbing whatever watched them. They weren't trying to escape nightmares. They were trying not to be noticed. The poses were prayers. The prayers were habits. The habits were hopes. And hope, at night, was often the only thing stronger than fear. Some said God watches over the sleeping. Others said God doesn't enter bedrooms after dark. So they watched each other. Wives watching husbands. Mothers watching sons. Because if the breathing changed, if the eyes moved too fast, someone had to be there to call them back. There were lullabies once, songs that shaped posture. Sleep with your hands crossed. Don't turn to the left. Don't whisper back. Generations learned to sleep not by comfort, but by warning. And when someone slept too well, when they didn't toss or mutter or turn, they said the body was resting. But the spirit might have wandered off. There was always one rule: never fall asleep on your back. They said that's how the dead lie. And if you did, something might lie down beside you. Some covered mirrors before sleep, so the soul wouldn't see itself and forget where it belonged. Others left a light burning in the hallway, not to see the way out, but so whatever passed through the room would keep walking. They weren't afraid of nightmares. They were afraid of the ones that felt too real. And so they prayed, in whispers, in posture, in silence, hoping that the night would pass by like a stranger who didn't know your name. At some point, people stopped asking why. They hung rosemary on the bedpost because their grandmother did. They tapped the doorframe twice before walking in, whispered something before blowing out the candle, turned the pillow north every third night. No one remembered the reason. But they remembered the warning. That's how superstitions survive, not through belief, through fear, disguised as habit. A woman in a village near the marshes refused to sleep unless her door was left half open. Not wide enough to let anything in, not closed enough to trap it. Her daughter did the same, though she didn't know why. A boy in the mountains buried a coin in his mattress every winter. His grandfather had told him it was for protection. He forgot what kind. In some towns, people knocked 3 times on their bedposts before lying down. No one knew what they were waking or warning. That's how it happened. The rituals were passed down not like scripture, but like recipes with no ingredients listed. And no one wanted to be the first to stop, just in case it mattered. In a northern village, people poured water on the doorstep before bed. They said it cooled the spirits. Or maybe it drowned them. No one really knew. In one family, everyone knocked once on the wall beside the bed, then turned the pillow 3 times, clockwise. The daughter asked why. The mother didn't know. The grandmother cried. A baker in the city hung garlic not from the door, but from the window facing west. She said it kept things from returning. But no one asked what had come before. These weren't beliefs. They were echoes. Habits made from someone else's fear. Copied. Repeated. Forgotten. And buried somewhere in those thousands of meaningless actions might be one that actually worked. There was a man who hadn't moved his bed in 20 years, not even to sweep under it. He said the first time he moved it, his wife had a nightmare so bad she didn't speak for 2 days. A young mother once confessed she made her children wear socks to sleep every night. Not for warmth, but because she dreamed once that cold feet walked away from her. In a village by the sea, fishermen placed stones under their pillows, heavy, rough ones. To keep the dreams from floating off, one of them said. No one believed it made sense, but no one dared be the first to break the pattern. And that's how it worked. Not because it was right, but because it had never gone wrong. A widow always placed a pair of scissors under her pillow. To cut the ties that bind me to bad dreams, she said. But the scissors never left the pillow. A shoemaker tied a red ribbon around his wrist every night. His grandmother told him it kept the spirits away. Sometimes he forgot to tie it. The nightmares came back. In a town far from here, people avoided stepping on cracks in the floor. It breaks the soul's path, they said. No one really knew why, but no one stopped doing it. And so the habits lived on. They were invisible fences, built not from wood or stone, but from fear and hope, repeated over years, worn smooth by the weight of generations. And in the end, no one knew which ritual truly worked. Some nights the prayers were whispered in vain. Some mornings the protections felt thin as smoke, but no one dared to stop. Because fear is a language. It speaks not just through silence, but through habit. Through the smallest of actions, repeated over and over. A knock on the doorframe, a coin buried beneath the mattress, a turn of the pillow. It is the voice of ancestors, echoing through generations, carrying warnings no one can forget. And in the quiet hours when the house is still and the shadows stretch long, it waits, waiting for the moment you forget, waiting for the night you fall asleep without care. Then the nightmare slips back in. But until that moment, the rituals live on. The habits persist. Because sometimes fear is the only thing keeping you safe. The peasants feared the night, not just the darkness, but what stirred within it. Shadows that whispered, shapes that moved just beyond sight. They didn't sleep easy, because sleep was not peace. It was another kind of danger. In the small villages scattered across the countryside, nights were long and restless, heavy with silence and fear. The peasants believed the dark was alive, not just empty space, but a living, breathing presence that watched and waited. They spoke of creatures that prowled fields and forests, unseen but always watching, waiting for careless footsteps or wandering souls. Mothers tucked their children tightly into beds, whispering prayers older than memory, words passed down from their own mothers and grandmothers, protection against what they could not see. Some said the night was a time when the boundary thinned, a fragile veil between the living and the restless dead. The wind carried voices, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, but always too distant and strange to understand. They feared the silence as much as the noise, because in silence you could hear the breath of something waiting, something patient, something hungry. Sleep was not peace. It was a holding pattern, a fragile pause before the dawn, a breath held in the darkness. Farmers would light candles at every window, hoping the flickering flames would keep the shadows at bay. Some carried charms made from animal bones. Others wore necklaces woven from dried herbs. One old man claimed he had seen a figure wandering the fields at midnight, a shape with glowing eyes and silence instead of breath. Children were warned not to stray too far from home, lest they be taken by the night walker, a spirit said to steal souls for its own dark purposes. The fear wasn't just of death. It was of losing oneself, the terror of becoming something less, something lost in the night's cold embrace. And so the villagers held tight to their rituals, even when they no longer understood why. Because the night was never just dark. It was alive. And waiting. One night, a farmer's wife woke to the sound of footsteps outside their cottage. She peeked through the window, but saw nothing but mist and shifting shadows. The footsteps stopped, then started again. Her husband said it was the wind, but the children wouldn't sleep. They whispered of a shadowy figure who had come to claim a lost soul. Stories spread of glowing eyes lurking in the forest, of soft cries heard through the night, of blankets pulled off beds by unseen hands. The village healer burned herbs at every door, chanting prayers meant to keep the spirits away. But sometimes, even that wasn't enough. Because the night didn't just hide monsters. It hid something deeper, something waiting to be found. Nights stretched long and heavy. The wind whispered secrets through cracks in the walls. Shadows moved where no light should reach. People kept a knife under their pillow, not for defense, but to remind themselves they were still alive. Old women told stories of souls wandering too far, trapped between worlds, unable to rest. Sometimes a scream would pierce the quiet. Sharp, sudden, then silence again. No one spoke of those nights in the day, because some fears were too heavy for sunlight. The village elders said, "Night is a veil. Behind it, truths hide. Some see them, some don't wake." Mothers would rock their children to sleep, whispering prayers that no one remembered, but that filled the dark with warmth. Because in that darkness, the mind could wander. The soul could get lost. And sometimes the night was more than a night. It was a test. As the moon rose higher, the village settled into uneasy silence. Windows were shuttered tight, doors bolted against the unseen. Some whispered of the night beasts, shadows that slipped between dreams and reality. Others spoke of lost souls wandering, searching for a place to rest. Fires were kept burning long into the night, the crackling flames a fragile shield against the dark. But even fire couldn't keep all fears away, and in the stillness, the weight of waiting pressed down. For many, night was not just a time of rest, but a vigil, a waiting for dawn, and whatever it might bring. The wind would howl through the trees, carrying voices that no one dared name. Some nights, even the bravest kept their windows closed tight, clutching talismans or charms close to their hearts. The fear was not just of what lurked outside, but of what stirred within, the dark corners of the mind, where nightmares were born. And when the morning came, many would wake with heavy eyes and restless souls, as if the night had not fully released them. But life pressed on, and with it, the stories. Whispered warnings passed from mother to child, each one a thread in the tapestry of night. And so the cycle continued. Fear wrapped itself in tradition, in whispers and worn rituals. Each night a promise, each dawn a question unanswered. But within that fear, a strange comfort existed, a bond between the living and the shadows, between the known and the unknowable. And for the peasants, it was enough to keep going. One night at a time, the nobles feared the night, not just the darkness, but the shadows within their own minds. Their dreams were heavy with power and guilt, visions of betrayal, loss, and judgment. Castles whispered with secrets. Corridors held silent witnesses, and chambers bore the weight of unspoken fears. They sought refuge in prayer and ritual, confessing sins they hoped to forget, hoping to quiet the restless thoughts that haunted their sleep. But the nightmares came regardless, vivid and unrelenting, reminding them that no title could shield them from the shadows that lived within. A noble woman woke drenched in sweat, haunted by visions of lost crowns and broken alliances. A lord paced his chamber all night, fearing shadows that whispered of betrayal within his own halls. Confessors heard endless prayers, souls seeking absolution for sins both real and imagined. Some nobles turned to mystics and seers, desperate for signs to guide their troubled sleep. But no spell could banish the gnawing doubt, nor silence the accusing voices echoing in their dreams. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their minds, each decision carrying the fate of kingdoms and lives. Nights became battlegrounds where fears clashed with duty. Some nobles sought solace in ritual baths infused with herbs, while others kept talismans close, hoping for protection. Dreams often blurred with reality. Visions of courts in chaos, banners burning, whispers of revolt in the wind. Yet no amount of gold or power could shield them from the restless night within themselves. For in the dark, even the mightiest fall vulnerable. The nobles' chambers were heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of silk and whispered prayers. Some sought comfort in sacred relics, relics said to guard the soul during the vulnerable hours. Yet even with such protections, the nightmares returned, relentless and vivid. They spoke of judgment and loss, of legacies crumbling to dust, of power slipping through trembling fingers. And in those moments, the mighty were as helpless as any wandering soul lost in the dark. Sleep offered no escape, only another trial, a haunting reflection of their waking fears. The moonlight cast long shadows through stained glass, painting distorted faces upon stone walls. Lords and ladies tossed in their beds, wrestling with ghosts of past choices and forgotten promises. Their sleep was a battleground of memory and fear, where every whisper carried the weight of consequence. Servants spoke in hushed tones of restless nights and pale faces, and how some nobles rose before dawn, burdened with dread that clung to their skin. In the silence of their castles, even power felt fragile, a candle flickering in a tempest. In the cold hours before dawn, when shadows grew long and still, the nobles faced their deepest fears alone. Titles and riches offered no shelter, no protection from the haunting questions. What legacy would they leave? Would their names be remembered kindly, or forgotten in the dust? The night showed them what daylight hid, their fragility, their regrets, the silent battles no one could see. And when the morning light finally broke, they rose, not just as rulers, but as weary souls carrying the weight of dreams too heavy to bear. Yet even in their weariness, the nobles held tight to hope. Hope that the dawn would bring peace, that the nightmares would fade, and that their souls might find rest, if only for a little while. For in a world ruled by shadows and light, even the strongest are haunted. And sometimes, the bravest thing to do is simply to keep sleeping. And so, behind the thick stone walls, beneath tapestries heavy with history, the nobles lay awake, caught between the weight of their crowns and the fragile hope of rest. For even in power, the night is a great equalizer, and every soul, no matter how high, must face its own darkness alone. Nights in the noble chambers stretched long and uncertain. Flickering candlelight cast restless shadows that danced on cold stone walls. They whispered of past deeds, hidden sins, and choices made in haste or fear. Servants moved quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of their masters. But peace was elusive. Every creak, every sigh of the castle seemed amplified in the stillness, reminding the noble that rest was often just an illusion. They clung to their rituals, scented oils, whispered prayers, relics pressed close, as though these could stave off the shadows lurking just beyond sleep. For beneath the grandeur and power, beneath the titles and riches, lay a simple truth. The night is a realm where all are equal, and even kings can be haunted by their own minds. The peasants feared the night, not just the darkness, but what stirred within it. Shadows that whispered, shapes that moved just beyond sight. They didn't sleep easy, because sleep was not peace, It was another kind of danger. In the small villages scattered across the countryside, nights were long and restless. The peasants believed the dark was alive, not just empty space. They spoke of creatures that prowled fields and forests, unseen but always watching. Mothers tucked their children tightly into beds, whispering prayers older than memory. Some said the night was a time when the boundary thinned, and the living shared the world with the restless dead. The wind carried voices, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, but always too distant to understand. They feared the silence as much as the noise, because in silence you could hear the breath of something waiting. Sleep was not peace. It was a holding pattern, a fragile pause before the dawn. Farmers would light candles at every window, hoping to keep the shadows at bay. Some carried charms made from animal bones. Others wore necklaces of dried herbs. One old man claimed he had seen a figure wandering the fields at midnight, a shape with glowing eyes and silence instead of breath. Children were warned not to stray too far, lest they be taken by the night walker, a spirit said to steal souls for its own. The fear wasn't just of death. It was of losing oneself. And so the villagers held tight to their rituals, even when they didn't understand why. Because the night was never just dark. It was alive and waiting. One night, a farmer's wife woke to the sound of footsteps outside their cottage. She peeked through the window, but saw nothing but mist and shadows. The footsteps stopped, then started again. Her husband said it was the wind, but the children wouldn't sleep. They whispered of a shadowy figure who had come to claim a lost soul. Stories spread, of glowing eyes in the forest, of soft cries heard in the dark, of blankets pulled off beds by unseen hands. The village healer burned herbs at every door, chanting prayers to keep the spirits away. But sometimes even that wasn't enough, because the night didn't just hide monsters. It hid something deeper, something waiting to be found. Nights stretched long and heavy. The wind whispered secrets through cracks in the walls. Shadows moved where no light should reach. People kept a knife under the pillow, not for defense, but to remind themselves they were still alive. Old women told stories of souls wandering too far, trapped between worlds, unable to rest. Sometimes a scream would pierce the quiet, sharp, sudden, then silence again. No one spoke of those nights in the day, because some fears were too heavy for sunlight. The village elders said, "Night is a veil. Behind it, truths hide. Some see them, some don't wake." Mothers would rock their children to sleep, whispering prayers that no one remembered, but that filled the dark with warmth. Because in that darkness, the mind can wander. The soul can get lost. And sometimes the night was more than a night. It was a test. As the moon rose higher, the village settled into uneasy silence. Windows were shuttered tight, doors bolted against the unseen. Some whispered of the night beasts, shadows that slipped between dreams and reality. Others spoke of lost souls wandering, searching for a place to rest. Fires were kept burning long into the night, the crackling flames a fragile shield against the dark. But even fire couldn't keep all fears away, and in the stillness, the weight of waiting pressed down. For many, night was not just a time of rest, but a vigil, a waiting for dawn, and whatever it might bring. The wind would howl through the trees, carrying voices that no one dared name. Some nights, even the bravest kept their windows closed tight, clutching talismans or charms close to their hearts. The fear was not just of what lurked outside, but of what stirred within. The dark corners of the mind where nightmares were born. And when the morning came, many would wake with heavy eyes and restless souls, as if the night had not fully released them. But life pressed on, and with it, the stories. Whispered warnings passed from mother to child, each one a thread in the tapestry of night. And so the cycle continued. Fear wrapped itself in tradition, in whispers and worn rituals. Each night a promise, each dawn a question unanswered. But within that fear, a strange comfort existed, a bond between the living and the shadows, between the known and the unknowable. And for the peasants, it was enough to keep going, one night at a time. In the Middle Ages, sleep was never just rest. It was a time when the soul's sins could surface, when dreams revealed hidden guilt and fear. The church watched closely, interpreting visions and nightmares as messages, warnings, or divine judgment. And for many, the night became a battleground, not just between good and evil, but between salvation and damnation. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel closed with a solemn thud. Within, flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows upon ancient stone walls. Parishioners knelt in prayer, their whispers rising in soft murmurs. For many, the night was a time of reckoning, when sins unspoken during the day came alive in dreams. A man might wake, heart pounding, haunted by visions of betrayal or greed. A woman might see shadows of jealousy or pride, their faces twisted in silent accusation. The church offered both fear and hope. Sermons spoke of confession and redemption, of the cleansing power of absolution. Yet the night held its own mysteries, and many feared the dreams that came in darkness. Confessors heard the whispered fears of their flock, souls burdened by guilt too heavy for daylight. Night after night, prayers were repeated, seeking forgiveness for sins both known and unknown. Some believed that failing to confess a sin would invite torment in dreams, restless nights filled with shadows and whispers. Monks chronicled these nocturnal struggles, recording visions of angels and demons, battles fought not on earth, but within the mind. The church became the arbiter of night's meaning, its interpretations guiding the faithful through darkness. Many kept relics by their bedsides, holy objects believed to ward off evil spirits and bad dreams. Some wore rosaries tightly in their hands as they slept, praying for protection through the long hours of darkness. Yet, even with such safeguards, the night was unpredictable, a time when the veil between the earthly and the divine felt thin. Dreams became messages, warnings from God or the devil, pushing the sleeper towards salvation or damnation. Fear of these visions influenced daily life, shaping confessions, penance, and faith itself. In humble cottages and grand halls alike, the faithful would rise in the night to pray, desperate to cleanse their souls of unseen stains. The whispers of angels mingled with the murmurs of demons, each vying for the soul's attention. Monks wrote treatises on the nature of dreams and visions, debating the meaning of shadows and light seen in sleep. They believed the soul traveled during the night, facing trials that reflected the sins and virtues of the waking day. Confession became a ritual not only of the day, but of the night's troubled hours, a sacred practice to prepare the soul for peace and salvation. Yet, for many, the night remained a battleground, a time of torment and testing. The fear of eternal damnation was not left behind with the setting sun, but returned in dreams that haunted and judged. Candles burned low, and prayers stretched long, as the faithful sought to keep the darkness at bay, hoping for mercy in a world ruled by sin and redemption. The Church's influence seeped deep into every corner of life, where the boundary between day and night blurred into sacred ritual. Every dream was scrutinized, a message from the divine, or a temptation from darkness. Parishioners shared tales of vivid visions, angels wielding swords of light, demons whispering secrets that chilled the soul. Confessors listened patiently, offering absolution for sins confessed in the waking world and the dream realm alike. Yet some feared the power of dreams so much, they sought isolation and penance, hoping to purify their souls through suffering. The monasteries became sanctuaries and prisons, places of both refuge and torment. Monks lived with the ever-present tension between hope and despair. Their nights marked by prayer, meditation, and fearful vigilance. And for all, the night was a time to confront the self, where sin and salvation danced in fragile balance. Midnight was a sacred hour, the witching hour when the boundary between the physical world and the spirit realm grew thin, allowing unseen forces to pass through. In this fragile moment, darkness itself seemed alive, filled with whispers and shadows that no one dared confront alone. In dimly lit chapels and cloistered monasteries, the air was thick with incense and anticipation. The faithful gathered in trembling silence, their faces pale with fear and hope. They sought the protection of the church, a beacon of light in the overwhelming darkness of the night. Priests, clad in solemn vestments, prepared for the rites of exorcism, their voices low and steady as they recited ancient prayers. The ritual was a battle fought not with swords or shields, but with words, faith, and holy water. Candles flickered in the heavy air, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance with the unseen. The possessed, or those believed to be touched by malevolent spirits, were brought forth amid whispered accusations and desperate pleas. Their bodies trembled, eyes wide with terror, as priests invoked the names of saints and angels, commanding the evil to depart. For the community, the exorcism was both a moment of salvation and of communal catharsis, a way to confront the darkness that haunted their nights and souls. The ritual was a fragile hope that the unseen forces could be banished, restoring peace to the restless. Beyond the spectacle, exorcisms were deeply personal struggles between faith and fear. The night was a battleground where sins, doubts, and terrors manifested in the bodies and minds of the afflicted. The clergy's power lay not only in ritual, but in their ability to channel hope, to anchor the fearful in the promise of divine protection. The midnight exorcism was a vivid reminder of the era's profound belief in a world unseen but ever present. A world where salvation and damnation were fought in shadows as much as in light. The ritual began with the ringing of bells, their sound cutting through the stillness like a summons to battle. The gathered faithful bowed their heads, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. The priest, eyes closed in solemn prayer, sprinkled holy water upon the trembling figure at the center, a person believed to be gripped by dark forces. Voices rose and fell in ancient tongues, weaving a tapestry of sacred words that seemed to push back the shadows themselves. The air thickened with the scent of burning herbs and candle wax, mingling with the whispers of the desperate crowd. Eyes darted nervously as the afflicted convulsed, battling unseen tormentors. Yet the clergy's resolve was unwavering. Their chants grew stronger, voices rising in crescendo as they called upon saints and angels to protect their flock. The exorcism was as much a spiritual warfare as it was a plea for mercy, a desperate stand against the night's terrors. Outside, the moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the stone walls and cloistered gardens. Within, the struggle continued, between light and darkness, faith and fear, salvation and despair. Each prayer, each invocation, was a lifeline thrown across the abyss, a promise that even in the darkest hours, hope remained. As dawn approached, the atmosphere shifted. The trembling ceased, the convulsions slowed, and a fragile calm settled over the room. The possessed, though weakened, was freed, if only temporarily, from the grip of the night's horrors. The congregation sighed in relief, their whispered prayers turning to soft songs of gratitude. But the midnight exorcism was not a one-time event. It was a recurring ritual, a symbol of the ceaseless battle fought in the shadows, in the hearts of the faithful. It was a testament to the human spirit's resilience, to confront darkness, seek light, and endure. The midnight hour held a sacred weight, a silence thick with anticipation and fear. Cloaked figures gathered, their faces etched with the weariness of countless battles fought not with steel, but with faith. The flickering candles cast elongated shadows that danced upon the stone walls, weaving a tapestry of light and darkness. The priest's voice rose in solemn chant, each syllable a shield against the encroaching night. The ritual was meticulous, a delicate balance of prayer, scripture, and sacred gestures designed to sever the ties binding the afflicted to malevolent forces. Holy water was sprinkled with reverence, the droplets hissing as they touched flesh, symbolizing purification and protection. Around the chamber, the congregation held rosaries tightly, murmuring prayers learned over lifetimes. Some wept silently, others whispered confessions of their own fears, joining in the collective plea for deliverance. The air was charged with a palpable tension, as if the very walls listened and awaited the triumph of light over darkness. The possessed writhed and trembled, caught between worlds, their eyes wide, reflecting the terror of unseen battles raging within. The priest's words pierced the veil, calling forth angels to cast out demons, commanding the night's shadows to flee. Each invocation was a desperate hope, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere shifted. The convulsions softened, the cries faded, and a fragile peace settled. The exorcism was a temporary victory, a reminder of the ongoing struggle between faith and fear. The congregation exhaled collectively, their prayers now tinged with gratitude and renewed hope. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, washing the stone walls in pale gold. Inside, weary souls found momentary respite, knowing that night would return, and with it, the eternal dance of light and shadow. As the final prayers echoed through the chapel, a hush fell over the assembled souls, a fragile peace born from fierce struggle. The night had tested them, challenged their faith, exposed their fears, and demanded surrender. Yet in surrender, there was strength, a quiet courage in facing the unseen, an acceptance of the shadows that dwell within. The exorcism was more than a ritual. It was a passage, a journey through darkness toward the light. For in the world between sleep and waking, where spirits roam and souls wrestle with sin, only faith could guide the lost home. And so, with dawn breaking, the faithful emerged, weary but unbroken, carrying hope like a candle against the lingering night. Because in those ancient rites, in those whispered prayers and holy words, they found not just deliverance, but the enduring promise of redemption. Dreams were not just visions, they were messages from the divine or the damned. Many believed that after a troubling dream, confession was necessary to cleanse the soul. The act of confession became a sacred ritual, a way to confront fears and seek forgiveness. Through whispered prayers and humble words, the faithful sought to restore peace within. Dreams were not mere illusions, but profound messages woven between the realms of the divine and the damned. In the shadowed world of the Middle Ages, a troubling dream was more than a restless night. It was a summons for repentance, a call to confront hidden sins and seek redemption. Upon waking from such visions, the faithful often felt an urgent need to confess, to lay bare the secrets and fears that haunted their sleep. The confessional became a sacred space where whispered words carried the weight of salvation, where the burdened soul could find solace and forgiveness. The act of confession was both ritual and release. Kneeling before the priest, the sinner recounted dreams of betrayal, envy, or despair. Sins felt as deeply in the heart as they were seen in the night. The priest, a vessel of divine mercy, offered absolution, guiding the penitent back toward light and peace. This sacred exchange was not only an individual act, but a communal one. The stories of troubled dreams and confessions echoed through village and monastery alike, weaving a tapestry of shared faith and collective hope. In these moments, fear gave way to grace, and the night's torment found a fragile end. Yet confession was a beginning as much as an end. It was a step on a path of ongoing struggle between darkness and salvation. A reminder that even in the quiet hours, the soul's journey continued, ever fragile, ever hopeful. The confessional was a place of contrasts, a small, dimly lit room filled with both fear and hope. Here, the faithful came seeking mercy, their voices trembling as they confessed sins revealed in dreams. Some spoke of visions that chilled their hearts, images of betrayal by loved ones, or the weight of pride and greed pressing heavy upon their souls. Others described encounters with angels or demons, figures that judged and condemned, reminding them that the night was never truly silent. Priests listened with solemn patience, offering not just forgiveness, but guidance, a path toward redemption. The ritual of confession after a troubling dream was not merely about absolution, but about understanding the soul's deepest fears and desires and learning to face them with faith. Communities depended on this sacred practice, knowing that through confession, peace could be restored, and the night's haunting could be eased. Yet the shadow of fear lingered, the fear that some dreams were warnings, omens of misfortune or divine displeasure. And so the faithful returned night after night to confess, to pray, and to seek solace, holding on to hope that their souls might find rest in the darkness. The night's grip was strong, but confession offered a fragile light. In the quiet murmur of whispered prayers, souls found a moment's peace, a chance to unburden their hearts and face the coming dawn with hope. For in that sacred exchange, fear gave way to grace, and the restless night softened. The dreams remained, echoes of sins and fears, but now tempered by forgiveness and the promise of redemption. It was a reminder that the journey was never simple, that even in the darkest hours, the soul could seek and find healing. As the first light of morning touched the world, the faithful rose renewed, carrying with them the quiet strength that comes from facing the shadows within. And though the night would return, with all its mysteries and fears, they knew that a confession was a beacon, a guide through the darkness, a step toward the light. But confession was more than ritual. It was a lifeline in a world ruled by uncertainty. Each whispered word, each humble plea, was a bridge spanning the chasm between fear and faith. In those moments, the soul found courage to confront its deepest shadows, to acknowledge its flaws, and to embrace the hope of renewal. The confessional's quiet space became a sanctuary, a place where the weary could lay down their burdens and where light pierced the darkest doubts. Stories passed down through generations spoke of saints who walked among the faithful, offering comfort in dreams and guiding lost souls back to grace. This belief wove itself into the fabric of everyday life, reminding all that redemption was possible, even when shadows loomed largest. In the end, confession after a dream was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the enduring power of faith, and to the eternal dance between darkness and light. Among the deepest fears of the medieval night was the dread of not waking, the eternal sleep from which there was no return. The darkness was no longer just a veil for rest, but a threshold between life and death, a place where souls could slip away silently into the unknown. Villagers whispered of those taken in their sleep, never to rise again, their bodies cold and lifeless come dawn. Stories told of spirits that roamed the night, collecting the souls of the unready, or demons that waited patiently to claim the unwary. This terror shaped much of the night's rituals. Candles were kept burning long after the family had gone to bed, their flames a fragile shield against the encroaching void. Amulets and charms were placed near the sleeper, believed to guard against the eternal night. Families prayed fervently for the safety of their loved ones, seeking protection from forces that moved unseen and unbidden. The fear of the final sleep haunted dreams and waking moments alike, coloring the very fabric of daily life. And so, the night was never truly dark nor silent. It was alive with watchful eyes and whispered prayers, a battleground between life's fragile flame and the unyielding shadow of death. The fear of the eternal sleep was woven into the very fabric of medieval life. It shaped how people prepared for the night, not just with prayers, but with rituals meant to hold death at bay. Families placed protective symbols around beds, from crosses carved in wood to herbs hung above doors, each meant to guard the sleeper's soul. Stories abounded of those who had glimpsed the night spirit, a silent figure cloaked in darkness, whose touch was said to steal the breath and lock a soul in endless sleep. Mothers warned children to stay close, lest they be taken in the quiet hours when vigilance faltered. Monks and priests held vigils, offering prayers and blessings through the night, their voices weaving a shield against the encroaching shadows. The church itself was seen as a refuge, a sacred fortress against the unseen forces that prowled the dark. But the fear was not only of death itself, but of dying unprepared, of souls wandering lost, unready to face judgment. This anxiety fueled confessions, penance, and the relentless search for peace both in life and beyond. Thus, the night was a delicate dance between sleep and wakefulness, life and death, hope and despair. Every breath taken in the dark was a victory, every morning a blessing. Amidst these fears, communities created rituals to ease the terror of the night. The lighting of candles, the ringing of bells, and the chanting of prayers served as bulwarks against the silent threat. Family members often kept watch, offering comfort and presence, refusing to let the sleeper be alone. In some villages, it was believed that the soul could wander during sleep, vulnerable to capture by dark forces. To protect it, loved ones would whisper blessings or place objects of faith near the bed. Such acts were as much about hope as they were about fear, a tangible way to grasp at safety in an uncertain world. The stories told by hearth and church alike carried a message. Life is fragile, and death can come quietly. But through faith and ritual, the eternal night might be held at bay a little longer. But beyond rituals and prayers, the night also held a strange solace, a time for reflection, for whispered hopes and silent courage. The fear of the eternal sleep sharpened the preciousness of life, making each dawn a triumph. Elders told tales of souls who had boast the night with bravery, guided by faith and the love of their community. They spoke of light breaking through darkness, of spirits protected by the grace of God, and of the enduring strength found in human connection. This balance of fear and hope shaped the medieval night, a world where every shadow was both threat and mystery, and every moment of rest was a gift fought for with heart and soul. In that fragile space between sleep and waking, the people of old found their strength, carrying the flicker of life against the vast unknown until the morning light returned once more. In medieval times, death was not the final silence but a passage into the unknown, a journey that demanded careful guidance to ensure the soul's peaceful rest. The line between the living and the dead was thin, blurred by fears, rituals, and ancient beliefs. The grave was more than earth and stone. It was a sacred threshold. What was buried with the dead was thought to protect them, and the living who remained, from restless spirits and dark forces that prowled the night. Every object placed beside a corpse carried meaning, a token of protection, a ward against evil, or a bridge to the afterlife. Families wrapped their loved ones in garments blessed by priests, sprinkled with holy water and herbs. Coins were placed on eyes, a toll for the passage beyond. Sometimes, iron nails or sharp blades were buried with the deceased, symbols meant to pierce wandering spirits and keep them at bay. In some villages, the dead were buried with personal possessions, a cherished pendant, a family heirloom, or a simple stone believed to anchor the soul. These objects were not mere keepsakes, but sacred tools in the eternal battle between light and darkness. The living performed rites and prayers, calling upon saints and angels to guard the sleeping dead. These rituals were both a comfort and a necessity, a way to ease the fears of those left behind, and to ensure that the night's terrors would not cross the boundary into the world of the living. But the fear was always present. Fear that the restless dead might return, haunting dreams and shadows. Stories told of graves disturbed, of spirits wandering lost and angry, seeking what was taken from them in life or demanding justice for wrongs unrighted. This deep connection between death, sleep, and the night shaped the culture and daily life. It forged a world where the living and the dead were intertwined in a fragile dance, where every ritual mattered, and every night was a vigil against the unknown. In that delicate balance, the people of old found a way to sleep better, not just through rest, but through faith, ritual, and the sacred bonds that bridged worlds. Beneath the cold earth, the dead lay guarded not only by soil, but by centuries of ritual and belief. Families believed that the right burial could keep the soul safe, ensuring that it would not rise in anger or confusion to disturb the living. Graves were carefully prepared. Crosses etched on wooden coffins, circles drawn in the dirt to trap spirits, and holy symbols carved into stones. Some burials included iron spikes or sickles, tools meant to pin restless souls, preventing their escape into the night. In certain regions, it was common to bury a small bell with the deceased. The ringing was said to ward off evil and guide the soul through the darkness. The sound was a beacon for lost spirits, offering safe passage and protection. But it was not just the physical objects that mattered. The prayers and chants performed during burial were believed to weave a protective web around the grave, a spiritual shield that stood against malevolent forces. The community gathered in solemn vigil, singing hymns to comfort the dead and strengthen the boundary between worlds. Fear of restless spirits led to practices like double burial, when the body was buried a second time after certain rites had been performed, ensuring peace for the soul and safety for the living. Some believed that improper burial could result in the dead becoming revenants, beings trapped between life and death, doomed to wander and terrorize. These fears seeped into the daily lives of the living. Tales of haunted graves, shadowy figures seen near cemeteries, and strange noises in the night were common. The dead were never truly gone, and the night was their realm as much as it was that of the living. Through these customs, the medieval world held tight to the hope that death was not an end but a guarded passage. The living did all they could to protect their own rest, and the rest of those who had gone before them. In the quiet moments before the final breath, the boundary between worlds grew thin, a place where dreams and reality intertwined, and the veil between life and death shimmered with fragile light. Deathbed dreams were sacred, mysterious, and feared. They were visions sent to prepare the soul for its journey. Messages whispered from beyond the mortal veil. Families and priests watched closely for signs. A final glimpse, a whispered word, a vision that might hold the key to salvation or warning. The dying often spoke of luminous figures, loved ones long past, or strange landscapes bathed in ethereal glow. These visions were seen as both a comfort and a challenge, a farewell and a summons. In some tales, the soul's last visions were warnings of unfinished business, urging the living to mend broken bonds, seek forgiveness, or complete sacred duties. In others, they were peaceful guides, ushering the soul toward eternal rest. The rituals surrounding deathbed dreams were complex. Priests would pray and anoint the dying, invoking saints to guard the soul's passage. Loved ones whispered prayers and sang hymns, hoping to ease the transition. These last visions shaped medieval understanding of death not as an end, but as a passage filled with meaning and hope. They were reminders that even in the darkest moments light could shine, guiding the soul home. As the final moments approached, the room would grow still, a hush falling over family and friends, each breath measured, each glance heavy with sorrow and hope. The dying might drift between wakefulness and dream, caught in a fragile space where the veil thinned and the spirit prepared to depart. Visions appeared, a soft light at the edge of sight, the faces of ancestors welcoming the soul home, or sometimes shadows of judgment that demanded reflection and repentance. These deathbed dreams were deeply personal, a last reckoning with a life lived, a final conversation with the unknown. The faithful believed these visions were more than mere illusions. They were sacred signs from the divine, offering comfort or warning, hope or challenge. Priests would interpret the dreams, offering prayers of deliverance or urging the penitent toward confession, even in their final hours. Family members clung to every word and gesture, seeking assurance that their loved one was at peace, that the journey beyond would be gentle and guided. The rituals of anointing and prayer filled the space, weaving a spiritual cocoon to protect the departing soul. In some accounts, those who passed with serene visions were seen as blessed, their souls assured a place in paradise. Those who struggled, haunted by troubling dreams, were believed to face a more difficult passage, burdened by regrets or unresolved sins. These beliefs shaped the culture of death, influencing how communities prepared for the inevitable and honored their dead. Deathbed dreams and last visions were part of a sacred narrative, a bridge between life and eternity, fear and hope, darkness and light. In the final hours, as the breath slowed and the eyes grew dim, the soul's journey began. Deathbed visions faded into the soft light of dawn, leaving behind a profound silence, a moment suspended between worlds. For those left behind, these visions offered solace and meaning, a sacred mystery woven into the fabric of loss and love. They were reminders that death was not an end, but a passage, one filled with light, shadow, and the eternal dance between them. The stories of deathbed dreams passed down through generations, shaping how the living understood their own mortality and the legacy they would leave behind. They taught that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine, guiding the soul safely home. And so, with reverence and faith, the medieval world faced the night, embracing its mysteries, its fears, and its promises, until the final vision gave way to peace. Yet, beyond the visions themselves, there was a powerful human need to find meaning in those last moments. Families held close to traditions, creating rituals that honored both the departed and those still living. The careful preparation of the body, the prayers said in hushed tones, and the sharing of stories about deathbed dreams all formed a tapestry of comfort amid grief. This delicate balance between fear and hope, loss and faith, gave shape to how people faced mortality. Deathbed dreams became a sacred passage, not only for the dying but also for the living, who sought assurance that their loved ones were not alone in the dark. In the flickering candlelight, surrounded by whispered prayers, the medieval soul stepped softly into the unknown, carrying with it the light of a life remembered and the promise of a rest well earned. In the quiet moments before the final breath, the boundary between worlds grew thin, a place where dreams and reality intertwined, and the veil between life and death shimmered with fragile light. Deathbed dreams were sacred, mysterious, and feared. They were visions sent to prepare the soul for its journey, messages whispered from beyond the mortal veil. Families and priests watched closely for signs, a final glimpse, a whispered word, a vision that might hold the key to salvation or warning. The dying often spoke of luminous figures, loved ones long past, or strange landscapes bathed in ethereal glow. These visions were seen as both a comfort and a challenge, a farewell and a summons. In some tales, the soul's last visions were warnings of unfinished business, urging the living to mend broken bonds, seek forgiveness, or complete sacred duties. In others, they were peaceful guides, ushering the soul toward eternal rest. The rituals surrounding deathbed dreams were complex. Priests would pray and anoint the dying, invoking saints to guard the soul's passage. Loved ones whispered prayers and sang hymns, hoping to ease the transition. These last visions shaped medieval understanding of death not as an end, but as a passage filled with meaning and hope. They were reminders that even in the darkest moments, light could shine, guiding the soul home.